in about just 2 minutes or so. All right, so just to open up, what Michael's going to go through in detail are solutions to the present crisis. Basically, the best thing that the United States has on the table right now to really turn around the whole economic crisis, and he'll go through that in detail. But to set it up, to kind of get into it a little bit, what the theme of what we're going to go through, I think what people should really try and have in mind guiding the whole process is kind of an overarching question that subsumes a lot of the specifics and facts and material that's going to be discussed, which is this question of what is mankind? What is the human species? And this is a question that Mr. LaRouche, Lyndon LaRouche, has spent his life dedicated to, and this governs his political work, this governs his strategic work, this governs his scientific work, is this overarching question of what makes the human species a unique, creative force in the universe. This was the basis of his economic work. That demonstrating clearly that mankind is not just another animal species. Mankind is not just another beast that will live and die and be gone as the planet moves on, but mankind uniquely contains a potential that no other living species that we've ever seen on Earth has. And so that'll be kind of the focus theme that should subsume all of the discussion here today. And to get into that a little bit, we're going to discuss kind of the context in which mankind exists from the standpoint of the history of life on Earth. And this is something that I've been working with Michael. We have a research team, a scientific team, working on economic policy and other aspects very closely with Mr. LaRouche. And this subject has been a subject of increased focus and discussion and presentation of our movement generally. And people might not think it's immediately relevant right on the face of it. Well, why are you talking about billions of years of life when we have an immediate crisis right now? But you really have to step back and look at, does mankind have an understanding of what the world in which it really exists, and what our unique power is in that world? Because if we don't have that, you're not going to have a society that can come to make the right policy choices, that can make the right choices for itself to face the crises we face. Diane mentioned this question of the asteroid defense. Just to kind of put that on the table briefly, that is just an obvious policy that we should be prepared for. You could have a situation where you could have months' notice that you have a rock barreling at the Earth, and here Obama is shutting down our space capability. And, a lot of the manned space programs would be rockets and space systems that would dual, that could also be used for defense systems. But the point is not that we're looking at, we don't know that this is going to happen next week or next year, but the question is, why are we actually focused on preparing ourselves to handle these types of threats when they do come, so we can actually take the action needed to address these things? So this is the type of policy orientation that we immediately need right now. But to kind of get into it a little bit, this is a specific graphic that might look a little confusing initially. There's a whole lot on there. We've got a number of different curves, a lot of stuff, but just to kind of give you a sense of where we need to place the imagination of the American people and humanity generally to really make the political shift right now, where we need to lift people's minds to so they can be actually thinking from the right standpoint to actually be prepared to move human society forward at this point of existential crisis. And what this is here is this is a series of graphs of shadows, really, of relationships of Earth activity with the galaxy as a whole, with our entire galaxy. And you hear people talking about life on Earth, activity on Earth, weather on Earth. Even just speaking in these terms actually becomes a fallacy, because more and more what we're discovering is that everything you experience on Earth, from the activity of life to basic weather to major geophysical activity, from earthquakes to volcanic activity, does have some clear relationship to the solar system and to the galaxy. And so just on the face of it, in the fundamentals, if mankind is actually going to even deal with our so-called problems on Earth, we're going to have to recognize that these problems are actually intimately connected with the whole solar system and galactic system. And so just to paint this in kind of the broadest strokes, this is very, very long cycles here. This is the past basically 500 million years, half of a billion years of activity. And so you have two sets of graphs. So
Could you read the categories?
Sure. Yes, sure. So we have, just to show, we have a split down the middle. So we kind of have two different sets of graphs here. And so if you take, here is about the present, and if you go back, you're going back about 500 million years. So this is quite a span of history. Human beings have been around somewhere on the range of 2 to 8 million years. So here we're talking about 500 million years. So we're talking about, huge scopes of history. What we know about this history is that and we'll get into these specific graphs, but the Earth and the solar system has not just been sitting in some static position in our galactic system. There's actually certain orbital characteristics of our solar system moving through our whole galaxy. This is an area of investigation. There's a lot of unknowns, but we do know for certain that our solar system is moving with certain periodic motions through our galactic system. And what's been more and more subjects of scientific research is that the periods of our solar system's motion through the galaxy, kind of motions up and down in the plane of the galaxy, because our best understanding is that the galaxy is somewhat like a disk, like a frisbee, and we don't just move around it, we also tend to move up and down through it. And so you have certain periods of motion. And what we've uncovered is that these periods of motion, these cycles of motion of our solar system within our galaxy, correspond to cycles of life, of evolution of life. They correspond to cycles of sedimentation, which indicates certain general geological activity. Motion of the continents moves in correspondence, has a correspondence with these galactic cycles. And even volcanism, major periods of huge volcanic activity show a periodicity that matches up with our best understanding of these galactic motions. So these all line up on one cycle, which is a 60 million year cycle of what we believe is the motion of our solar system above and below the kind of disk of the galaxy. So that's one cycle of activity. A second cycle on the right-hand side here is a period of about 140 million years, which is our best estimate of the period of transition of our solar system from one spiral arm to the next spiral arm of our galactic system. People probably, I don't have one here, people have probably seen pictures of different galaxies. A whole lot of galaxies, you can see they have this spiral arm formation. So you don't have just a homogeneous distribution of stars. You have certain densities in these arm structures. And what we see here is that, again, there's a cycle of evolution of life that corresponds with these galactic motions. And there's also a cycle of climate variation. and ice ages and major global climate periods corresponding with these galactic cycles. So the point is not to fixate on all the specific. There's a whole lot of research in all this, a lot of details that we can discuss more after, and can refer you to different papers and articles and different things. But the point is, we're at a crisis where we actually have to uplift, we have to take the imagination of the American people. We need to express a quality of leadership that actually takes people's minds out of just their immediate sense-perceptual conception of who they are, how they feel today, who they're meeting tomorrow, what they're going to do next week. And we have to, the crisis just as much now is actually raising the minds of people to something much bigger than what they think they are. Actually raising the minds, the imagination of people to what mankind can be. And that will define our ability to address the crisis, because mankind as a species, our ability to progress is defined by our ability to imagine and create the future we want. So if we're not stretching our imaginations to the highest levels of what we know mankind can be, we're not going to be in a position where we'll actually take the appropriate actions and the policies needed to deal with the present crisis. So this is to kind of situate what we know about life and weather and general geological activity here on Earth, which is that it's not just here on Earth. It somehow is expressing some intimate connection of our whole Earth systems with the entire galaxy in which we live, which is a pretty awe-inspiring and provocative point at which mankind's at to actually begin to take up these questions as serious questions. So what I'm going to focus on specifically here, just to set up some of the discussion on the NAWAPA work, is specifically these cycles of what's referred to as biodiversity, which just basically means how many different types of species do you have alive at any time. That what we know from the records of evolution, the fossil records, is that you've had dramatic changes in the types of life that have existed. We're all familiar with the dinosaurs, as kind of, your childhood image of you had a planet that had a totally different system of life, totally different types of life. You didn't have all these mammals running around you, these giant reptile, lizard creatures dominating the planet. But that was just one period in a whole succession of different types, completely different types of life that have dominated this planet. But what we see here is at first, this succession was not completely just Earth determined. That this progression, evolutionary progression of life, somehow expresses this relationship to the Earth's relationship to the whole galaxy, the whole galactic system, which we see here in this expressed in this cyclical relationship. But what we're going to focus on here is that this is not just simply a cyclical relationship. Again, the cycle, again, was counting, looking at the changes in the number of species, the total number of species that have existed, which is expressed in this graph here, where you're basically, again, just to be familiar with it, we're looking at about the last 500 million years, the last 500 million years. So again, a huge time scale, huge time scale. But what we know is that there's been enough studies done of the fossil records, digging up different bones and skeletal remnants, that we do have a general sense of how many different types of animal life existed at different stages in this process. And so that's what this graph here expresses. You're looking at the total number of different types of species that exist, that we have records of at these different periods of time. And so what we see immediately is that there's a general, just maybe for reference, this period here, for example, the Mesozoic is, especially the latter part of it, is the period in which the dinosaurs were the dominant forms of life. People are probably familiar with this reference to 65 million years ago, which was this major extinction event which wiped out somewhere in the range of anywhere from 50 to 80% of the different types of species that existed on the planet in a very, very short period of time geologically. So you had a dramatic shift here, which was then kind of punctuates the end of the system of the dinosaurs, the dominance of the system of mammals, and a whole new system of life, just to kind of give some reference to this particular graphic here. But what we've been investigating is to take up the question of so we can see a general increase in the process. We can also see something that we'll call a question of increase in energy flux density. Is may sound like a technical term if you're not familiar with it, but to describe a certain quality of increase in this process, because it's not just an increasing number of species that have existed. It's been an increasing quality of activity of these species. You're getting successively more and more energetic types of life. You're getting types of life that move quicker, that consume more, that require more resources to sustain themselves. You're getting what people are familiar with the conception that most people are brainwashed with in school, which is this idea of entropy, claiming that the universe is entropic and everything is actually slowly winding down, becoming less energetic, less energetic, less energetic as the heat of whatever reaction or processes is slowly dissipating. And you have this whole, most of society today, especially in the United States and Europe, is brainwashed with this conception that we live in a universe that's slowly winding down and becoming less and less active over time, which is a completely fraudulent conception. And this tale that life tells us is a very good illustration of the fallacy of that view and a very, very good basis, kind of like a negative case, as we'll see in a few minutes, to reflect upon what mankind actually does express as a power in the universe and what type of orientation we immediately need to actually move forward and get out of to move mankind into a new state. So again, we have this metric of the total number of species that have existed over this period of time. But then to try and illustrate a certain quality of that changing process, to get at this question of the energy flux density question. A few researchers back in the 90s said, okay, we have this chart. We have the total number of different types of species that have existed. But what happens if we take certain specific characteristics, like the ocean life, how many types of animals have the ability to freely swim, and how many are just kind of floating around or just stuck to the ground or completely unable to freely move themselves around? Which might sound like kind of a funny thing. When you think about life in the ocean, we think about fish, sharks, whales. Most of life you think of is stuff that can get around itself. Which is, but there's also other forms of life like clams, coral life, whole classes of animals that actually don't have the ability to freely move themselves around the ocean. So it might sound like kind of a funny distinction to make, but the point is if you take this classification, which types of animal life can freely swim around and move around, and which types are just kind of floating along with the system, just float around with the currents or just stuck to the bottom. If you make that division, that's what this graph here is expressing, that division in different types of life. The bottom darker curve is the number of species that do not have the ability to freely move themselves around. The top curve is those that do. And so what we see is that if you take that division, and then if you look at the ratio at any point, like if you can see here at the most recent period, proportionally we have many more types of free swimming animals than we have animals that are not free swimming in proportion. if you look back at previous periods, say 500 million years ago, the proportion is much different. You have more of an equal proportion between these two qualities of life. And so this next graphic is illustrating specifically that proportion. People can see here. Where again, we're dealing with this past 500 million years, this past half-billion-year period. And we're looking at the increasing proportion of types of life that are free-swimming, active forms of life compared to forms of life that are unable to move themselves around. And as you see here, what the records show us is that you have successive stages of increasing, an increasing proportion of freely swimming life. From here to here to here. And the point is that this is just a first kind of, we're just picking one characteristic here of this idea of free swimming. And what we'll see in a second is this illustrates an overall quality of increasing energetic activity of the system of life as a whole, over this entire period. So one first expression of that is the number of species that are able to freely move themselves around. To go to the next graphic, another metric we can use is the question of metabolic rates or consumption rates. And again, we see the exact same three sets of kind of plateaus or systems. So again, we're looking at proportions of different types of life, different types of animal life specifically. And we're looking at specifically how many of the species had generally higher metabolic rates and how many had generally lower metabolic rates. And the idea of the significance of the metabolic rates is, a good illustration would probably be the example of, say, taking a mouse versus a lizard or a salamander, where a mouse is warm-blooded. It can, if it's cold, it can still move around all at once. It can run around freely. It can do it at once. If you have a lizard, you put it in a shadow, and it can't get its solar radiation. It tends to slow down, can't move as fast, tends to generally shut down. The ability of the mouse to do that is dependent upon its quality of having a higher metabolic rate. It has to consume more food. It has to breathe more often. It has to consume more oxygen. All this is required for it to maintain this higher level of activity, this higher state. That's just kind of one example. So if you take that type of classification of types of life that are generally more energetic, require more food, can move more freely, that you have not just a steady proportion, but you have successive stages of increasing energy of the whole system of life. Now, why this would be particularly important to really draw and illustrate for the American people today and society generally is that people have been so brainwashed with this conception of the green movement, with this environmentalist conception where people are taught that nature exists in some type of balanced equilibrium, that it's this perfect system, and that anything we do will be somehow disrupting this perfect system. And that somehow life is just this, in this pristine balance, and that, the only thing that mankind should do, that should not be allowed to actually intervene to change that process at all. And this is what's kind of pounded into people's heads. This is the British policy, and it comes from an imperial policy, but this has been pounded in people's heads in the educational system and in society generally today. But if you look at the history of life itself, you see that there's no overall balance to the whole process. You're seeing a constant process of a certain quality of increase. And the point with this kind of opening here is to try and illustrate that quality of increase, that life has continually been moving towards more and more energetic forms of life, with a higher number of species, with higher requirements for consumption, for food intake, for oxygen intake, and for higher ability to move around freely, to transform its environment, and to act generally. So this idea that there's some fixed balance that we have to respect is a completely fraudulent conception. And this idea of entropy, this idea of the universe somehow being governed by a process of slow dissipation of energy and the universe generally becoming less and less energetic through time, is a completely fraudulent conception. We actually see the inverse. We see what Lyndon LaRouche had discovered in the terms of physical economics as an anti-entropic process, a process in which, if you take the case of life, life constantly moves to these more energetic states. And what you see is that the types of life that cannot move to these higher energetic states are wiped out, are eliminated, don't continue on with the process. And you see that illustrated very clearly here with the fact that each of these transitions from one system to the next system to the next system are punctuated by the biggest mass extinction events. Again, the Cretaceous, where the dinosaurs were wiped out. People are familiar with this one. The Permian mass extinction. This is thought to be the largest mass extinction. Upwards of 95% of species in the oceans, for example, are thought to have been wiped out over this geologically short period of time. So if you look at this process, what we see, looking at the whole thing, is that what are supposedly the most destructive and devastating events, these mass extinction periods, what do they actually express from the standpoint of the whole process? They express the transition to successively higher systems, to more advanced systems, to better systems of life. And so what we see is that there is a principle to evolution. There is a principle of progress to the history of life itself. That life as a whole, through the evolutionary process, is constantly increasing its energy activity. It's constantly increasing its consumption requirements. It's constantly changing how much it changes the planet. Life doesn't just, life has a huge effect in actually transforming the planet, the atmospheres, the oceans, the soils. Everything you experience on life on the planet Earth is constantly shaped by the activity of life. Life is a geological factor, a geological force shaping the entire planet. And what we see is that life's activity in doing that has been increasing over this period. But the point is, so this is kind of set up to put people in the right kind of conception of what universe you're living in. You're living in a progressing universe. Again, this isn't just happening on Earth. This is happening with the Earth relating with our solar system, relating with our entire galactic system. This is another illustration of these three successive systems. But the point is that what it took to do this for life as a whole was an entire evolutionary process of millions of years. And it required the elimination of countless species. To transition from one system to the next energetic system, there had to be an evolutionary upshift where completely new forms of life took over, and the older forms of life, the less energetic forms, either were somehow able to be incorporated in the new system or went extinct. But the point is, to kind of set up what Michael's going to discuss, is that it took life, millions of years to do this. And it took successive species, one species to the next. But then we have the emergence of mankind, of the human species. And what we see with mankind is a power to create what you could loosely describe as this quality of change, this quality of transformation. Mankind is the only species that we've ever seen that has the unique power to willfully create this quality of change. That we don't have to go extinct and be have a new species of mankind with 4 arms, and 3 legs or something to then make the next step. It's not like to fly. Mankind had the Homo sapiens had to go extinct, and we had to have a new species that had wings or something. Mankind has demonstrated a unique power of the human mind to create these qualities of transformations by his own willful action, a power that no animal species has ever demonstrated. So the question now for mankind is, can we actually come to realize that conception? Can we actually have a form of political government, international relations, and culture, a cultural system that is built upon this scientific conception, understanding the scientific distinction of mankind from beast, understanding the scientific distinction of mankind from animal, understanding the unique creative powers of the human mind as the primary factor in creating what the human species, in defining what the human species actually is. And this has been really the fight throughout history, going further back than Plato. But you could take Plato as a reference, going through the work of Jesus Christ, of Nicholas of Cusa, up through the American Revolution. You do see a continuity of an attempt to begin to recognize and understand this type of distinction, this unique understanding of human nature, and to create a political system that actually is designed to facilitate the development of that creative power of every single human individual. And we won't be able to understand the immediate crisis unless you understand that that's what's at stake. That's what we're fighting against. We're fighting for the first time, the complete dominance of the planet by a real scientific conception of what the human species is, and how we need to organize ourselves in international relations based upon that type of conception. And maybe just to kind of put one sharp point on it before transitioning to Michael to discuss, what type of policy we immediately have to carry through with this conception. Lyndon LaRouche brought this up in the LaRouche PAC weekly report of just last Wednesday. And I think it's a useful conception to kind of put out there, is that, what do we fundamentally know? You have all these people complaining about this species is gone, it died last year, and we lost another species here, so, we're destroying the whole planet. But if you step back a second and say, well, what's really true? If you actually lift the imagination of mankind to this scale, what do we know for certain? We know at a certain point the sun is not going to continue to be as nice to us as it's been. You look at something like, we have seen plenty of novas, of stars exploding. We know that the sun is not just a static system that's going to go on forever. The sun at some point is going to either expand. I mean, there's theories about how exactly it works. I'm not going to pretend we have it fully understood. But at some point, in a few billion years, perhaps sooner, perhaps later, the sun is no longer going to be able to sustain life on Earth. It's either going to explode, or it's going to expand to the point where it engulfs the entire Earth, the entire Earth's orbit. So where's your conservation then? Where's your environmentalism then? Where's all your species then? But then you come back to the question of mankind. Well, what actually has the power to sustain life even through an event like that? What in the universe actually exists that has the willful power to continue life even beyond an event like that? Even if we don't know how to do it today, we know that the only species that can demonstrate that capability is mankind. You're not going to have the movement of the whales to the moon or something. I mean, you're not going to. So to kind of situate, but the point is that, even if you're talking about the sun, blowing up in 2 billion years or whatever, the point is not to sit around and wait. The point is to act now to take the advantage of the current crisis and take the reality of the current crisis to bring mankind into a state where we begin to actually prepare ourselves for taking on these challenges, and we begin to actually orient our governments and our relations in the types of activities typified by NAWAPA, typified by the Russian proposal for taking the asteroid defense threat seriously. And we actually begin to organize our society under this conception of mankind as not just an innovative or, interesting species, but the only creative, willfully creative force that we know of. And begin to immediately develop our full capabilities of that potential, rid ourselves of this entire monetarist and imperialist systems, and take the present moment in history as potentially the biggest inflection point in human history, and move human society away from this imperial conception, this imperial system, and towards a real self-conception of mankind as a creative force in the universe, and orient all our policies and financial systems and credit policies to facilitate that transition, that shift. And with that, I'll give it to Michael to discuss our first step in that process.